All right, so today the topic is web queries, but it's really, what we're really after here is the process of recording ourselves doing something and then looking at the code and modifying it. And so we're going to do that in the context of a web query. So I've got a new workbook open, blank workbook. I'm not downloading anything, just starting with a blank workbook. And let's just suppose that you have, you have some internship here, and your job is to, like, first thing in the morning, you got to go and get a bunch of information online and kind of download it and bring it into some other system. And let's just say that we have like a list of tickers. So here's our tickers. I'll put a few tickers in here. My very favorite ticker, Southwest Airlines. We'll put in Google, Apple, American Express, ExxonMobil, Ford, GM, Microsoft. That's enough. There's 8. And I think I'll go ahead and name this sheet. I'll name this sheet tickers as well. So I don't really need to be on caps lock. And let's suppose that your task is for each one of these tickers to pull the price earnings ratio and the earnings per share. So we've got to fill that table out. Now we don't even know how long the table is. The length of the table is defined by how many tickers there are. Can you imagine being hired as an intern and having to do something like this regularly? In your imagination, can you imagine that? Just raise your hand if you can imagine that. Yeah, this is pretty common. Why? Well, that's the whole reason we hire interns, is to do the work that no human would want to do. And so we'll hire an intern to do that. And this is actually pretty common. I was really surprised. It was probably a couple years ago. I had a student come back from his internship, and he stopped by my office, as is common. He'd tell me how great things they did on their internship. I hope you'll come and see me when you do great things on your internship. So I did my internship at Amazon. And it was great. I was the superstar there, and it was all because of VBA. And I thought, well, great. Well, tell me about it. This is so great. Sit down and tell me all about it. And turns out his job was to do this very thing at Amazon. And I thought, if you were to make a list of all the companies that you think could automatically go out and collect data from websites, Amazon has to be pretty near the top of the list. Who's probably higher than Amazon? Google, maybe. I'm not sure. But you got to think, Amazon, you're not going to hire a human to do a repetitive process to go look at stuff online. And so I thought, you're not telling me the truth. You're telling me a fib of some kind here, just to make me feel good. And I said, no. I was working in the digital products, digital cameras division. Now, Amazon wants to make sure that their pricing is competitive. They're selling all kinds of products. They want to make sure it's competitive, and so they keep track of what competitors are selling things for, and they I'm not sure they always try to be lower, but they say I want to be close. But digital cameras, like high-end digital cameras, is different. Anyone familiar with the high-end digital camera market? Who sets the price? You say, who sets the price for those cameras? Yeah. Yeah. Those upper level, those cameras that cost maybe more than $1,000. Yeah. You know who sets the price for those? Yeah. The manufacturers set the price. They say, listen, we're going to let you sell our products, but you're contractually obligated not to sell them below. You can sell them for more, whatever you want, but you can't go below this price that we're saying. Even if you're willing to take less margin, you're not allowed to do it. And so most of these high-end digital cameras, they sell for exactly the same price, the lowest contractual level that you can sell it. So how do you compete in a digital market where you can't compete on price? What are you going to do? Free stuff. Who said it? Yeah, free stuff. Well, we said, listen, we're going to bundle this. If you buy this camera from us, we're going to give you a camera. We're going to give you a tripod. We're going to give you some kind of remote so you can take the picture while you're standing away. And maybe we'll give you some free photo processing for a year or something. That's how we're going to compete. So Amazon, the vast majority of the stuff that Amazon's doing is, in comparing prices. And they're not really set up to be able to compare bundles. So what did they do? They hired an intern to go get data every morning. So he started his job, like Wednesday morning, Tuesday morning, and by Friday he said he was ready to commit suicide. That was his job, right? Go find out what's the bundle today. Oh, look at that. It's the same bundle as it was yesterday. Next product. What's the bundle today? Huh, same as it was yesterday. And so he left work on Friday just thinking, oh, I got to find a way to automate this. And he remembered back to day 3 of this class. He probably went back and watched the videos. And over the weekend, he worked all late into the night Friday, worked all day Saturday. He confessed to me he didn't even go to church on Sunday. He worked all through Sunday. And by Monday morning, he had automated his job. So he's got his job now, and he just presses a button, and it goes and gets the information, does exactly what he was doing, but by hand. He was doing by hand, does it automatically. Now, it turns out before they hired him, this division at Amazon had contacted their IT department, whatever the IT department, internal IT department is in Amazon. And they said, listen, we got to have a way to look at bundles. What did the IT department say? They said, we can do that. It'll take us a year, and it will cost you $100,000. And what did they say? What did they say? We'll hire an intern. So we said, we'll just hire an intern. And their intern did what was supposed to take a year and $100,000. He did it over the weekend in his spare time. Was he a rock star? Yeah. Did he get a full-time offer? Yeah. And I think I heard I didn't know if he'd taken it or not, but then someone actually had watched the video where I talked about this last and contacted me. Hey, I know the guy you're talking about. He took the job. So I don't know if he's still there, but probably still working. So yeah. So this kind of stuff really happens, even at companies where you might think it wouldn't happen. Okay, so this is our task. So let's suppose that's your task. You've got to go and get this information. How are you going to do it? You don't pretend you don't know anything about VBA. I mean, right now you know almost nothing about VBA, so it's not much of a stretch. But pretend you don't know anything about it, and say, what would you do? Yeah, go ahead. All right. So probably go to finance.yahoo.com. Oh, you'd split the screen. Oh, or maybe you'd have 2 screens or something. Okay. Yeah, I'm not splitting the screen. I'll split the screen later. Okay, so here's a quote lookup. You put in here Southwest Airlines, LUV. I think I'm already there, but we'll go there again. And so now here's the information. And what do we got here? The bid-ask spread, the range for the day. Oh, here it is. Price earnings ratio and earnings per share. TTM. Who can tell me what TTM stands for? Trailing 12 months. People asked me that for a year. And I said, I don't know. Finally, I looked it up. That's what it is. Trailing 12 months. So there's the information that we want. So if you're doing this by hand, what's your process? It's copy, go back to if you're split the screen, that's a pretty good idea. You don't even have to change windows. You can go back to the other one, paste, come back here, copy, go there, paste, next ticker, copy, paste, next ticker, copy, paste. If you're doing that, maybe you've got dozens of these to do every morning, first thing as you do an internship. Where is your mind going to be? Someone tell me where your mind is going to be. Yeah, it'll be somewhere else because this task does not engage your mind. And as a result, what's going to happen? Yeah, you're going to make mistakes. The fact that it doesn't happen it'll be pretty slow, that's a problem. That's not the big problem. The big problem is you're gonna make mistakes. And anytime you've got mistakes in your data that could lead to mistakes in decisions, they can be really expensive. They can get expensive quickly. And so, yeah, this is not well suited to a human, but it is pretty well suited to a computer. That's the whole point. In fact, what we have here with Excel and VBA is our own personal information slave. And not only that, but the slave is thrilled to do it. Think about it. Out of how many installations do you think there are of Excel in the world? We don't have to put a number to it. That's a lot. How many of those installations have ever even opened the VBA environment? Maybe 10%. So you imagine it, probably. So the VBA interpreter is sitting around thinking, why was I created? They never use me. I'm just sitting around here. My users don't even know I'm here. I mean, I couldn't believe it. They turned off my tab when they installed me. I mean, that's by default. I'm not even visible. And then all of a sudden, someone comes along and says, VBA, I have something for you to do. What does that interpreter do? Oh, joy. It's thrilled. It's going to be really boring. I don't care. It's going to be the same thing over and over and over again for hours. Wonderful. Right? You're thrilled to do this. And so that's what we're going to do. So here's the idea, is that we are going to record ourselves using the web query, which you've already seen, to get the information from one ticker, take it over, web query the information in, and bring that information, fill it in here. We'll record ourselves doing that once. And then we're going to go and look at the code and modify it a little bit, and we'll make it happen over and over again to do the whole list, however long the list is. So that's the chore for today. So let's begin by making a web query. I don't want to record myself making the web query. If I record myself making the web query, then when I play the macro back, what do I get? I get a new web query each time. New web query, run it again, new web. I don't want a new web query. I want to use the same web query and just update it to get the right information each time. So I'm making a new sheet. I'm going to come to the sheet and I'm going to call it web query. The truth is, I could do this with the default names, but this will make our code a little bit more readable. And remember, that's the goal for today, is to kind of go through this process of recording ourselves doing something and making sense of the code. So we've got this set up. I'm going to go ahead and make a web query. Now remember, the web query that's available on the data tab, data from web, is this new one, and it's going to generate code that's more complex for us to work with. I don't want to start there in the beginning of the class. We're going to use the legacy web query. So find where it says, tell me what you want to do. Type in web, and then choose from web the legacy version. Remember that it's going to bring up a really bad browser. Probably have some errors dealing with the active content. There we go. We had a student, last time we were together, we had a student who it just wouldn't ever quit. He'd say no, he'd say no, 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 no. And even that wasn't working, but when we found out what was happening is that when he was moving his mouse back across, it was triggering something else that caused the error again. So, you know, maybe once you tell it to quit, don't move across, come around the top to get in here. And then we're going to put in the ticker symbol here. Now, just because I want this to go a little more smoothly for us, it turns out that this web query wizard does not deal with finance.yahoo.com very well. I think we could probably click through, but there's a lot of closing to do. So instead, let's just start off with this at a random website. And by a random website, I mean random.org. So random.org is a very simple interface. As far as I can tell, it doesn't have any active script on it at all. And all we're trying to do is trying to get a web query. I don't care where it's going. I just need to get a web query onto this page. And I'm going to go ahead and import it. And it should be asking me here where I want to put it. Where do you want to put this? I'm going to put this in A2. I've got something else in mind for A1. We'll see that here in just a little bit. I'm going to put it in A2. And we'll say OK. Now, I haven't recorded myself so far. I'm just making a web query. No recording yet. And so here's, you know, just whatever it's brought. It's not very much. There's not really interesting information here. Random.org is just a place where you can go and do some random things. You want to do a dice roller, roll some dice, coin flipper, card shuffler, just random stuff. I mean, anyway, random stuff. OK. All right, so now we have the ticker. Or now we have the web query in place. So here's what I'd like to do. I would like to record myself configuring that web query to go get the information from finance.yahoo.com and for Southwest Airlines. So let's go ahead now and record ourselves doing this. Now I'm going to do something. The split screen idea actually was pretty good. I like that idea. I've never done this before to where we can actually, we will see the code that's being written while it's being recorded. This might be kind of neat. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on to get myself starting to record. Depending on how much screen estate you have on your computer, you may just want to leave it full screen. It's going to record the same whether you see it or not, but we'll show it up here so we can kind of see it and talk about it as it's recording. So I'm going to come to my developer tab. And I'm going to choose record macro. Actually, before I choose record macro, I got to think about two things before I start. I want to say, listen, when the user, whenever I get this macro created, when the user goes to run it, what cell do I want them to be in when they say run this macro? And remember, this macro is just getting the information for one ticker. So which cell should be the active cell when the user runs this program that we're developing? Any thoughts? B2 is a pretty good choice. The thing is that there are lots of others. There's at least 7 other ones that are equally good. So as long as I'm on any stock ticker, that would be great. Because that's how the user's going to tell me the stock ticker they want to get the information from. That's going to be the active cell. So in the active cell, there's a stock ticker. We're going to go get the information. We're going to put it the next 2 cells over. Okay, so A2 I think is a fine place to be. So I've thought about that. Where do I want the user to be when they run this thing that I'm writing? And that's where I start. So I start recording from that position. The second thing is, after this thing runs, where do I want the active cell to leave off? So where is that? What cell, after we've gotten the information for one ticker, what cell should it be in? Okay, so C9 would be way down here. I don't like C9. Other choices. I'll tell you why I don't like it after I hear one that I do like. A3. I love A3. Because after I've done it once, if I stop on A3, I'm ready to do it again. And then it'll take me down, I'm ready to do it again. And so, and it may be that I'm going to just, do this by hand. Maybe only 8 times here. Maybe I'll just press it, the hotkey 8 times. But anyway, it gets me ready for the next one. Okay, so now that I've thought about those 2 things, I'm ready to start recording. So I'm on Developer tab, I choose Record Macro, and now it asks me for the name. Any combination of letters, numbers, and the underscore character are valid here. No spaces, no like minus signs or anything. And the first character has to be a letter. So I'm going to call this, I'll call it stock data. Stock underscore data. Shortcut key. Let's see, we used Control M last time we made a shortcut key. Let's see, stock data, why don't we use Control S? Wait a minute. S, that sounds familiar. What does it do? It saves? Not anymore, it doesn't. Now it runs this macro. Okay, so you see why you need to be careful with it? You see why you don't want my mother doing this? Yeah. She'd be like, she'd call me up. Son, every time I try to save my workbook, something strange happens. Mother, have you been playing with VBA again? Oh, yes, it's so interesting. Stop, Mother, just stop it. Okay, listen, there's a couple of different places. I don't want to leave it here in Control S. So instead, I'm going to put a capital S in there. And that'll change the shortcut key to Control plus Shift plus S. And so it's an extra keystroke, but it turns out of the 26 letters of the alphabet, 25 of them are already pre-mapped to do stuff that Excel does automatically. Control S does, Control P does something else. Control A does something else. The only one that's not mapped is Control M. So you could use that, or you use Control Shift. And for all I know, Control Shift S does something, but I don't ever use it, so I'll be happy to override it. Now, 3 places I can choose to store this macro. One is this workbook, and that's where we're going to store it every time we do a macro in this class. Second option here is to make a brand new workbook and put the macro in that new workbook. That's a possibility too. And the third macro is this one here called the personal macro workbook. This one's important that we understand it, even though we're not going to use it in this class. The personal macro workbook, actually, so first question is, I might have 1,000 macros on my computer. Which of those 1,000 macros can I run? Just because I've got them like saved in workbooks on my disk, I can't run those macros. Before I can run those macros, what has to happen? The workbook has to be open. And I can be on this workbook and I can say, I want to run a macro on this workbook from some other workbook. That's okay, as long as the workbook's open. So to be able to run a macro, it has to be in an open workbook. So what the personal macro workbook is, it's a magical and mysterious place that when I say to save a macro in the personal macro workbook, Excel creates a workbook called personal.xlsb. XLSB is just a binary form of XLSM. It's slightly more efficient. It's faster to read than XLSM, but otherwise it's the same. And so it creates that workbook, it puts the macro into that workbook, and then henceforth and forever, for time and all eternity, whenever you open Excel, it also will open up that personal XLSB workbook, and it will hide it. So it'll be open and hidden. So why do you put something in the personal macro workbook? Yeah, you're saying this is something I always want to have available. Now, if I record something macro, put it in the personal macro workbook, and then send the workbook I'm working on to a colleague, does he have that macro? No, it's sitting on my machine. So you got to think about, should this macro just always be available for me? Personal macro workbook. If it needs to follow this workbook around, it should go into this workbook. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to put stuff in this workbook because I got to grade this stuff after all. And if you put it in your personal macro workbook, I'll never see it. Okay, so we're going to leave this as the default, this workbook. let's see, get EPS or PE ratio and EPS from Yahoo. This is just a comment. Okay, now before I click OK, and feel free to split your screen and do this if you want to. Actually, I may not be able to do that before I click OK. I should have opened this before. Do I have my, oh, it is open. Good. Okay, so here is my VBA editor. Here I've got book 1, and I've got like 3 objects in here. I've got something for this workbook, for sheet 1 and for sheet 2, but that's it. So watch what happens as soon as I click OK. I click OK, and now it's added in this modules group. It's created a module. Now, you remember last time we were together, we created a module to be able to write some VBA. As soon as I start recording, it says we got to have a place to record it. I'm going to go ahead and open up this module so we can see it. I'll double click this module 1. Then I'm going to close my other windows here so we can see a little more of it. And so here, this is the stock data macro. I'm recording it. I'm recording it right now. And it's made some comments here, right? Starts with a single quote. It's just a comment, a note to a future programmer. It has the comment that I wrote, and it tells me the shortcut key that I'm recording it with. So now, as I do things, we'll kind of see the statements come in as we go. Now, I already am on the cell that I wanted to be on, so I'm not going to navigate somewhere else, because if I navigate somewhere else, it's going to record and go to that cell. I want to just start wherever the user is. First thing I'm going to do is going to copy. So, how do I copy? Home, copy. Or Control-C would do it. And you'll see that wrote in the first statement. Selection copy. Object.method. Object is selection. So we're saying whatever is selected, it can be some object. It could be a cell. It could be a chart. It could be a shape. It could be a part of a chart. Probably other things that it could be. And whatever is selected at this moment, copy it. Great. So now we've got it copied. Now I'm going to go select my web query sheet. And you'll see that when I click on that sheet, we'll get another statement in here. So I'm clicking on it, and there, sheets, out of all the sheets, there's one called web query that identifies the object, and then it executes the method select. We're telling the web query sheet to select itself. Remember, the method is something that the object knows how to do. It's activity, it's an action that's built into the object. Okay, so now I want to select A1. This is why I'm going to paste the ticker right here into A1. So if you're already on A1, you'll want to click off of it. And you'll notice here, if I click, a different one, it realizes, you went there, but you didn't do anything. You probably don't really want to remember, go activate all these cells just so you can end up somewhere else. So until I actually do something, it won't really remember where I'm leaving off. So I'll come back to A1, select A1, and then I'll paste. Paste from here? Is there a way to paste? Oh, paste right here, paste. Control-V would do it, or enter, I think, would do it as well. So here I've pasted that in. And now, again, object.method, ActiveSheet.paste. You might have, when I first saw that, I thought, why isn't the cell? Why don't they just have, why is it a sheet object, ActiveSheet.paste, instead of ActiveCell.paste? And turns out, we paste lots of kinds of things to worksheets that don't go in cells. Like if you paste a shape or a picture, it doesn't really go into a cell, it kind of sits on top of it. The idea is you tell the worksheet to paste, the worksheet looks at what's on the clipboard and goes, oh, that's a cell. I can paste that into a cell. Oh, that's a picture. I can't put that in a cell, but I'll just put it somewhere else. So it decides kind of how to paste it. All right, now I want to record myself editing the query. So I'm going to first select one of the cells in the query. And then I'm going to right-click that, and I'm going to choose Edit Query. And we'll see what happens. So it's brought up my little web query editor, again, web query wizard, but it's also given me this application.cutCopy mode equals false. What is cut copy mode? Anyone know? Go ahead.
That little box that appears when you're,
when you've copied something, you get the little flashing lights that goes around saying, this is what's been copied. Yeah, and when you've got that showing, Excel is in a special mode. It behaves differently. Like if you press enter when you're in cut copy mode, what does it do? It pastes. Enter doesn't normally paste. Enter normally commits the change that you're on and moves you down a cell. Here, because you're in cut copy mode, oh, you press enter, we're going to paste. And so this now has caused us to come out of cut copy mode because we've moved on. We're no longer going to have that section selected. It puzzles me that it records this because even if we delete this line, it will still work just the same. But when they wrote the macro recorder, they said, oh, we just came out of cut copy mode. There's the statement to come out of cut copy mode. All right, so now I'm going to just go ahead and put in the value that I need here. I forgot to tell you this, but when you start recording a macro, everything that you do is going to be recorded. I guess maybe that's obvious. But even before you start recording the macro, everything you do is being recorded in heaven. But now it's being recorded by Excel too, but it's not quite everything. When we get to a dialog box like this, the macro recorder says, oh, dialog box. I can see you need a little personal time here. I'll avert my eyes. And the recorder does not pay attention to what is going on in the dialog box until you press OK, or in this case, import. Once you do that import, then it'll take a look and see how everything is configured. And then it will say, great, that's what we have. It'll record, it'll build a block that generates that for you. So even if we were to paste in here the URL, it would always be to that particular ticker. We'd have to modify it anyway. And we'd have a bunch of dialog boxes popping up saying, hey, you can't record this, you can't run this macro. So the fact that I've opened it and say import will give me the code that I need to work with. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on import here, and even though I haven't put in that address, haven't changed the address, I'll click on import. And we can see now it's brought in this box that says, hey, that's the way this thing is configured. And let's go ahead and stop recording right here. We have some more work to do, some more recording to do, but I want to take a look at what we have here so far. So I'm going to come back to my developer tab, click on stop recording, or by the way, down here in the bottom left-hand corner, when you're recording, you have a little stop button that shows up in your status bar. You can just click that as well, and that will stop your recording. Okay, so your code should look something very similar to what we have here so far. The one thing, depending on how you pasted, the cut copy mode equals false might have happened a little earlier. Like right after paste. If you hit enter to paste, it'll happen in a little bit different sequence, but here we go. Okay, so we've seen this. Now here's the block that gets created to kind of say, oh, you just configured the dialog box. This is the configuration that we're dealing with. Okay, with. Let's talk about this with structure. It's the first time we've seen it. It happens that there are times when you say, listen, I got to do a bunch of things to an object. I got to run a bunch of methods on this one object. I got to modify a bunch of properties of the same object. I get tired of typing that object over and over again.
That's right.
Yeah, and so that's what the with structure is for. It says, listen, with, and then identifies some object. We'll talk about it here in just a minute, and then end with. Inside that structure, with to the end with, anything that starts with a dot, any expression that starts with a dot, it goes, oh, you just need to put the object that we're talking about in front of that. Kind of unfortunate that we have that additional level of complexity here, but that's the way it works. So what object is this? Let's back up right here. What object is this? It's a selection, but at this point in my code, when I run this code, what is selected? Yeah, range A2, so this is a range. So this is a range object, specifically to range A2. And as a property of that range object, there's something called a query table. Now, query table, it's not called a web query because it's the same object that does different kinds of queries. You want to do an object that interacts with a corporate database, it's a query object. And so depending on how it's configured, it'll behave differently. So, and right, there was a query associated with that cell. So it's saying, listen, with the query that's behind my selected cell, I want to do a bunch of things. And here's the first thing we're doing. We're setting the connection. This connection is a URL. That's the part that makes it a web query. It's a URL connection. And then it actually has the URL that we're after. Oh, this is not the URL that we want. And so here, I'm going to edit my code right here, and I'm going to plug in the URL for Southwest Airlines, for finance@yahoo.com. Now, actually, let me zoom in here. Windows plus. There we go. Okay, So finance.yahoo.com/quote/LUV, oops, slash question mark P equals LUV. I'm a little bit puzzled as to why they have to say the ticker for Southwest Airlines here twice. Who can tell me what this question mark means? Anyone know? Go ahead. Say it again. So you're querying it like a database, probably not the best description of what this question mark is in a URL, but it does have something to do with that. Go ahead. It is because I searched, but again, generally, what does the question mark mean in a URL? You just may not know, that's okay, I'll tell you. Everything before the URL gets me to a particular resource on the server. In fact, if I start editing this first part here, this is the protocol. This says how we're gonna communicate. Then everything up to the next slash gets me to a particular host, a particular machine, a particular computer that I'm talking to. And then everything up to the question mark is getting me to a resource on that server. And then everything from the question mark over are parameters. They're saying, whatever resource I'm actually activating here on the server, I'm going to give it some more information. So they're called parameters. I'm just curious. I'm just wondering what would happen if I got rid of this part, everything after the first love, and pressed enter. I just want to see, does that bring me to the same place? Yeah, it looks like it does. It's the same PE ratio, earnings per share. I'm here at Southwest Airlines. Great. So I'm going to copy this URL and bring it back to my VBA. And so protocol included. So instead of random.org, I want to go to finance.yahoo.com/quote/love. Now, what's the problem? I mean, I'm not done here yet, and particularly, why am I not done? Say it again? Yeah, the computer is, well, it's looking for love. That's kind of sad, poor computer. But it's always going to be looking for love unless I tell it to look for something else. What do I need to tell it to do here? Where should it be looking to get the ticker that it wants? Go ahead. Okay, so the comment is it should iterate through the range of cells in the first sheet. Ultimately, that's what we needed to do. But remember, what this activity is, this is just getting the information for one ticker. We're just building a block that gets the information for one ticker. So no iterating yet. We're going to iterate, but not yet. So where should I be looking to get the one? So from the current selection, no good, because we selected range A2, which is in the result of this query. That's the current selection of that query. Oh, we could go from this, there's a range has an offset method. We could say from the current selection goes somewhere else. That's possible. But we did something very specific. We actually put the ticker we're interested in a very specific place. Where do we put it? A1 on the current sheet, on the web query sheet. So here's what we're going to do. It turns out these quotes right here are, they're what we call it's the text qualifier. What it says is, well, listen, let's back up. When we look at this, when the interpreter looks at this, it goes selection. I got to figure out what that means. Oh yeah, it's an object, a reference to an object. I got it. And then it's got to look at this. Those copy. I got to figure out what that means. Ah, it's a method of the object. And it goes along right here. And then it gets to this quote right here, and it goes, whew, I don't have to understand this. When we put something in double quotes, it says, the interpreter, you don't have to understand it. You have to keep track of it, but you're not trying to figure out, this doesn't mean anything to you. This is just, as far as you're concerned, a collection of characters. Keep track of it for me. And so we put, it's called a string literal when we do that. String means collection of characters. Literal means it's just fixed in the code. And that will always be that way. So here's what I want. This is almost all right, but I'm going to delete. That's kind of sad. I'm deleting the love. So goodbye, love. And now I'm going to concatenate, use the ampersand symbol, same way we do it in a cell. And I'm going to bring on a reference to range A1. So here's how we refer to A1. This gets me to the A1 object. Now I got to tell which property I'm interested in. What property am I interested in? I want the value of that cell. Ah, question is, but you don't really have to put value, do you? And the answer is you don't. This is one of the mistakes that Microsoft made when they were making this language. They said, we want to, and remember the philosophy is we want to figure out what the user meant. And if they forgot to put the property, we're going to guess at the property that they meant to put. And so many, maybe not most, but many objects have a default property that if you just refer to the object and use it like it's a property, the interpreter goes, okay, I'll just use the default property. What's the default property for a range? It's value. That would be okay. But I would much prefer for you to specify what you mean. Object.property. The less we have the interpreter guessing at what we mean, I think the healthier it is. So it would work without the dot value. I encourage you to put the dot value.
Do you have to specify the sheet at all?
The question is, do I have to specify the sheet? That's a good question. So how many, in this workbook, how many ranges do I have that are A1? I have two. I have two sheets. There's one on each sheet. How does it know which one? If I don't tell it which sheet, it assumes you just mean the active sheet. It would be identical to me coming in here and saying active sheet. So active sheet identifies an object, but I don't have to put that. If I just see a range starting by itself, it goes, okay, that means the active sheet. Right. And because we activated the web query sheet, and that's still the active sheet. Yep, go ahead. Question?
I don't know if you're leading this or not. I know you talked about, hey, we just record this once, we can copy it 9 or 8 times for however many stickers we have. But if we were going to loop it, would you want to use range a1.value, or would you want to use some kind of variable like x or name?
So here's the question. Professor Allen, it sounds like you're doing an example to just do one here, but ultimately we're going to be looping this thing. Do we always want to be looking at A1? And the answer is, yeah, I'm trying to simplify things here. We actually did this first part here where we said copy it, go to the web query sheet and paste it so that it would always be in that cell. We could do this differently. So instead of always looking at A1, it's got some other expression to look at a different one, and actually just it could be iterating through our other sheet. And that would be great if we're writing this out by hand. But remember, our exercise today isn't how can we write the most efficient code to accomplish this task. It's how can we get by with as little as possible. What we're trying to do is we're trying to record as much as we can and edit as little as we can. And what have we edited so far? Yeah, we've edited the URL. So we come in here, we put a different URL in here, and we've made it dynamic. So it'll go and pick its value for the ticker up off of A1 each time. Okay? Okay, this next line, in fact, we could run this. I'm going to go ahead and run this. Don't run this with me. Just watch. It's a little bit sad. I'm going to come back here. I'm on my ticker sheet. I'm going to press Control-Shift-S, and I get an error, invalid procedure or argument, debug. So I'm just going to hit the debug, and it'll tell me. It got to here. It didn't know what I was talking about. In beginning, I think in Excel 2013, this line gets produced by the macro recorder. I have no idea what its intention is or why they put that in there, but it's just wrong. The macro recorder records it wrong. It doesn't often happen. Kind of sad that it happens on the first day we're working with this, but the rest of the example is so great, we live with it. So we're just going to delete that line. Or you could comment, if you weren't sure about it, you could comment it out. See, we haven't really talked about this use for a comment, but if I put a single quote in front of this line, it turns that executable line into a comment, so the interpreter ignores it. That's kind of handy, especially when you're first starting, because you're saying, I don't know if I'm going to need this or not. I'm just going to get rid of it for now, put a comment, and then it'll quit working. Okay. The rest of this stuff is just the default stuff. We don't care. Web formatting, none. Text to columns, true. Whatever all this is. This last one, though, is important. We could actually delete all the rest of these lines except the last one, which tells it to refresh the web query. We should be able to run this now, and it should actually bring in the data for Southwest Airlines or whatever ticker we start on. Let's give it a shot. I'm going to stop this. So making sure that you have either deleted or commented out the command type line. And I'm going to come back here to my ticker sheet. I'm going to come, I'll go to Google, and I'll press Control-Shift-S. And that should bring in the data and take me to the web query sheet. Anyone get that already? Yeah, you're there already, a couple of you? Okay, here we are. So here's where I pasted goog into A1. And now if we scroll down, we should be able to find this information. Here is, yeah, here's the PE ratio and the earnings per share. As you look, I'm just curious, does anyone have a PE ratio that's in a different cell than mine, 84? What cell is yours in? 36? You're in 36 too? Yeah. So what's going on in 36 up here? 36. Interesting. Okay. That's further away than I expected it to be, but I did expect it to be somewhere else. This is okay. What that means is that what we're doing is we're bringing in the whole worksheet. We're bringing in that whole thing. And depending on advertisements that may be above or different things that have happened on this sheet, it could show up in a different place. So we can't rely on that being in the same place. We're going to see how to deal with it. But now I think we're ready to start recording again. We're going to record. So we've gotten ourselves to this point. We've got the data that we need to be after. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and put my active cell back here on A2. That's the cell that was active when I stopped recording. And I'm going to start recording again. So I'm going to come back to my developer tab and record macro. It's going to call it macro 2. That's fine. I'm actually going to bring both of these macros together here. So this name is going to be irrelevant. I don't know reason to put a shortcut key on it or a comment because all that's going to go away. And I'll just say, okay, I'm recording again. Go ahead and come back to my code so we can see this new macro now being recorded. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to find, oh, what was it called? PE ratio, I forgot what it was called. All right, folks, I'm going to scroll down to it. I think it'll actually record me scrolling down to it. Yeah, look at all that scroll. With the scroll.
When we did record macro, did we pull up the previous macro that was already recording and add to it? Or?
So the question is, when we hit record, were we somehow adding to our existing macro? And the answer is no. Excel used to let you do that. It used to let you say, put my insertion point somewhere and record where it put more steps into it. And I think that caused more problems than it was worth. And so they took that away. So when we start recording again, it's going to make a new macro. And it just recorded all my little scrolling there. We'll delete those, that's fine. So here's where my other one ends, and now it's made a new one right here, just a new one. So we're going to join these together. What's that? Oh, really?
Well, at least here, if you keep fingers on the
The comment is it won't record the scroll if you do it with the trackpad or maybe the mouse wheel. Anyway, they're easy enough to delete. I need to define exactly how this was done here. PE space ratio TTM. That's what I'm looking for. Okay. Oh, whoops. Oh, actually, if you can kind of see it here, I'm scrolling and it's just keeping one line and doing it. I'm going to stop recording and I'll start again now that I know what that is. We'll throw away that whole one. We'll make a new one. Okay, start recording. All right. So I'm just going to search for that because I don't know exactly the cell it's going to be in because it moves around depending on how the page is rendered. I'm going to search for that text, PE space ratio space TTM. So Control F will search. What am I looking for? PE ratio TTM. And I think case isn't going to matter here. I'll say find next. We can see it's giving me a little block of code here, cells.find. It's pretty good. Now, I got to be careful. I'll go ahead and close my find window. What is it going to record if I now click on B84? What will it record? It'll record go to B84. I don't want to go to B84. Where do I want to go? Yeah, I want to offset one cell to the right of where I am. Now, you're familiar already with this notion of an absolute reference versus a relative reference when you're writing a formula, yeah? Nod if you are, yeah? There's a similar notion in recording a macro, that when I go to a cell, does it record absolutely where I'm going, or does it record the code that moves me relative to where the active cell is? And right here below my record, stop record button is use relative references. And I can turn this on and off depending on what behavior I want to record. So I'm going to turn this on to use relative references. And so now I'm ready to select B84, and we should be able to see that it gives me an offset. Here's what it recorded, active cell.offset. We'll talk about the range A1, which is kind of a mystery as you're starting here, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So now it's offset at that. What do I want to do? I want to copy it. So Control C. Oops, I got to make sure I'm active on my workbook. Control C, copies. I'm going to come back to my ticker sheet. We see it, record the statement that goes back to the ticker sheet. Now, do I want to do the absolute reference to this cell, or do I want to use a relative reference to this cell? Yeah, relative. I want to go one over from where the active cell is now. So I'm still on relative references. That's great. So I'll click there and I'll paste. Enter. I'll come back to my web query sheet. It records, activate that sheet. What's that? Oh, the question, isn't this the Southwest Airlines information? And no, this is the Google information. I updated it to Google, but it won't matter because when we run it, it will be the right one for whatever ticker we're on because it copies the active cell and then it updates it with that information, then it pulls it back. Okay, now what do you think? How should I get, what are my options to get now to this cell here that's got my earnings per share data? I could Control F again and look for EPS TTM, or I could just do a relative move to go down. And here's the question. Do I think it's likely that the order of these is going to change? Or once I have found PE ratio, am I relatively certain that the earnings per share is going to be right below it? Go ahead. That's the question. And this student says, don't trust it. I'm going to trust it. But you're right. And the truth is, I've been doing this example for a decade. They haven't changed it. They've changed the sheet quite often, but they have never changed the order that's happening here. Even if I was to do a search for EPS TTM, I'm relying on them to not have to have changed the label. I mean, what if it said EPS no space TTM or EPS TTM colon or something? They can make that kind of change as well. So yeah, we are at the mercy of the creators of the website. I'm just going to go ahead. I'm on relative references. That should now record go down. Yeah, active cell offset 1 row 0 columns. I'll copy. I'll come back to my tickers. Again, I'm still on relative references. I select the next cell over. It records offset 0 rows 1 column, and I will paste again. Am I done? What's the last thing I have to do? I want to end up on the next ticker down, still on relative references. That's where I want to be. I'll click on Apple. It records offset 1 row, -2 columns, moving backward a couple columns, down 1 row, and now I'm done. I will stop recording. Okay, now over here in my code, I've got this whole macro 2 that was a bad idea when I started scrolling. So I'm going to just delete macro 2 altogether. And here's the end of my stock info, my stock data macro. And then here's the beginning of my next one. Well, I want to bring these into the same macro. What do I do? Yeah, just delete the end and the start of the next one. And that now has the old starting place and the new ending place, and everything between it is now my macro. So now when I run Control-Shift-S, it should run this macro and it should do the whole thing. Oh, this should be delightful. Here I am on Apple, Control-Shift-S. And it used to go a lot faster than this. I don't know why it's taken so long. There we go. I'll do it one more time. Control-Shift-S. And we should get the data for American Express. I'm not entirely sure that I couldn't do that faster by hand, but this is guaranteed to get it consistently, and that's going to be important. Okay, how are we doing? Questions? Go ahead.
Is there a way to do this so if you have to log into a website that requires a username and password,
Ah,
VBA to put in username and password?
the question is, could we do this to a site that requires a username and a password that you have to log into to be able to get the data? The answer is yes. The legacy web query wizard can do it, sort of. The new web query wizard, a little more advanced, a little bit better at it. We're not going to do either of those approaches in this class. We're going to spend a couple of days seeing how to automate a browser in this class. So that as far as, we'll literally open up a browser and we'll have Excel tell that browser what to do. And that browser will go and we'll say, okay, find the login information, put the username and the password in, press the submit button, it'll log in, now go and find the other information. That, as you might guess, is quite a bit more complex than what we're doing today. You're not ready for that. Maybe you are, but most of the rest of the students aren't. So we'll get to that. Yeah, and it's one of the great things about automating with VBA. Other questions? Okay, now our next task is just to make this happen over and over again. So I'm going to make a new macro. In fact, I would prefer to call it, if I didn't record it, I'm going to call it just a subprocedure, a VBA subprocedure. I'm going to write a VBA subprocedure. And I'm going to do this above stock data. I could do it below. The order doesn't matter. But this one's going to be really short. And so I'd kind of like to be able to see the top of my stock data macro while I'm working on this one. So here I have now another activity that I want to do exactly the same thing that stock data does, but I want to do it over and over and over again. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll call this get all data. Now, as soon as I put sub, I'm going to have to put an end sub. And all subprocedures have these parentheses right here at the end. We'll use those for something specific later in class. We're not using them yet. So watch what happens when I press enter. The VBA editor goes, oh, you just made a sub. I'll put the end sub in for you. And I'll even put the parentheses in for you. Isn't that thoughtful? That was so kind. So now I have a new subprocedure. And I would like it to start off by making it do the same thing that stock data does. Here's how I do it. I can just come here and say call stock data. So now when I run this subprocedure, it gets to the call statement and it says, oh, I got to do stock data. And so from right there, it jumps down here and does every line inside of stock data. Boom, 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 boom. It does all of this. When it gets to the end sub way down here, it comes right back up here to the call and says, okay, what's next? And does whatever's next. It turns out that you don't even need to put the word call. You can just put the subprocedure by itself. Now, I want this to happen over and over and over. So to do that, I'm going to use a programming idea called a loop. Now, we can record a lot of things, but there are some things you can't record. And a loop is something you can never record. You can never record yourself doing a loop. But you can write a loop pretty simply. Here's what we do. I'm going to come in here, and I'm just going to say the keyword do. Do does nothing more than says, this is the beginning of a loop. At some point in the future, I'm going to have to come back here. This is where it starts. And then I'm going to space these in a little bit just visually so I can kind of see the structure of the loop, even though this is so simple, I probably get by without it. And then I'm going to put here loop. Loop says, go back to the prior do. This is a loop. Actually, this loop is so common, it has a special name kind of across programming languages. Does anyone know what loop I've just created? It's called an, well, it's a do loop. Yeah, do while loop. But this one in particular, how does it ever know when to stop? Let's think about it. It says, here's the beginning of the loop. Stock data. Bing, 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 bing. Next comes back, next statement, loop. Back to the top. Stop data. Stock data. Bing, 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 bing. Loop. Up to the top. Stop data. Bing, bing, bing. I haven't given it any way to exit. Yes, an infinite loop. Yeah. How long will this execute? Well, forever. It's a really long time. It's not going to go forever. It will go until it has an error, or until there's a power failure, or a nuclear holocaust, or the second coming, until something really unexpected happens, It's going to continue to execute. This won't go forever because what happens inside of stock data? Every time I run stack data, what happens to the active cell? It goes down one. And eventually, it's going to get to the very last cell, and it's going to tell it to go down one. And that will be an error. It'll try to do something it can't do, and that will cause it to stop. That'll take a while because it's like 1.04 million rows down. It'll finally run out of space. How long would it take us to get there? A long time. You know, the very first time I bought a cell phone, I was talking to the clerk, and the clerk said, it's unlimited minutes. I mean, what do you mean unlimited minutes? This is before unlimited plans were that common. I said, what if I want to talk for 1,000 minutes? It wouldn't cost you, it would cost you the same. 10,000 minutes. I said, listen, you could talk for 1,000,000 minutes in a month and it won't cost you any more. And I said, I don't think there's 1,000,000 minutes in a month. He said, no? No, I don't think so. But if there was, you could talk them all. That's the point. There's nowhere near 1,000,000 minutes in a month. It would take a long time to get down there. The truth is, we're going to have an error earlier because when we try to call this, I'm not sure that would cause an error. Without a symbol, we'd have a problem. I need to give it some way to stop. And the truth is, I can put the condition, the exit condition, either up with a do, or I can put it with a loop. Either one, doesn't matter. And so I'm just going to do until my active cell's value, active cell.value, what? Okay, so I could put in here until the active cell's value is like stop. And then I could come on in here and say, I'm just going to put the keyword in here, stop. And so it'll know when I get to stop, I should stop. I don't really like that approach. The main reason I don't like that approach, for all I know, stop is a valid ticker symbol. I mean, could be a ticker symbol, I don't know. So I could do stow or st or just or nothing. And that's how I say nothing. There are several ways to say nothing. But it's a little bit weird way to do it. It's a really convenient way. It's just a zero-length string. It's a string of characters with what in it? Nothing. And that's exactly what an empty cell is. There are other ways that we could check to see if a cell is empty, but this is a convenient one. Let me do one more thing while we're here, although this is not required. This word do events is a keyword in VBA. And anytime you're making a loop, especially when you're starting, it's a good idea to put this statement into your loop somewhere. Because what it says is, without the do events in there, this loop is just going to do, it's going to process, right? Finally, the VBA interpreter's got something to do. And if I tell it to do something and put it into a loop that has no way out, it will keep doing it so fast that there's no way for it to listen for me to tell it to quit. And I would have to kill Excel to stop it. But if I put the keyword do events in there, then it says every time through the loop, it stops and says, hey, is someone trying to get my attention? No, okay. Is someone trying to get my attention? No, okay, do the loop. Is someone trying to get my attention? So it would let me break into it. And it also does things like update the screen if I'm doing things that otherwise aren't being updated. So that's just a good habit to be in. Now, I want to do one more thing, and that is, since this is getting all the data, I don't want to just assume that we're starting in the right place. I want to tell it to go to the right sheet and to select the right cell. So I'm just going to copy the statement from down below. I want to select A2 because that's where my first ticker is. And I'm going to select my ticker's sheet. I'll copy that line from below. So now when I say get all data, I'm saying, great, make sure that the ticker sheet is selected, then select A2, and then go into this loop that continues to get the stock data until we hit a blank cell. Now, am I doing anything to move the active cell down? In this loop, I'm not, but remember when we made the stock data macro, it moves down. So I think that should work. We could run it, but it takes kind of a long time to run. So I'm just going to shorten this down a little bit. I don't want to have all of those to run, but we'll do 3. And I'll just put a blank row in there, and that way it'll stop when it hits this blank row. But now how am I going to invoke this? Control-Shift-S runs just a single one. Should we put a hotkey to do it? We could. Or we can put a button right here on the worksheet. Let's do that. In my developer tab, I've got this little thing right here that looks like a little toolbox. These are my tools. It says insert. I'm going to insert a button. Now, I've got two kinds of controls. I got form controls, which are generally beautiful and easy to use, and ActiveX controls, which are difficult to use and don't look as nice. They're a little bit more powerful. I'm going to stick with the form controls, at least for today. And so we'll choose this first one, this little button control on the form. I'll then click and drag, and it'll say, oh, you're making a button. You probably want to run a macro. I do want to run a macro. Which one do I want to run? Get all data. We'll say, OK. It builds the button. I can change the text to say, get data. The text on the button is irrelevant to what happens. I've already made the connection to the macro. And now I should be able to say, get all data. Click it, and it should run and get those 3. With a little more effort, we could control exactly what we're seeing here. But this should finish running and then show us the result. Seems like it took. And so we have some updating going in there. Looks like, let's see, we've got Goog. Not quite sure exactly. We kind of have, I guess that's the ticker sheet. It's actually, the screen's not fully updated. It's actually kind of showing us right now A1 from the web query sheet and then the rest from over here. It looks like we're on Apple. It should fill that value in and stop. There we go. So we've got the data. Oh, not too bad for our third day, our first day at working on this. Kind of a nice little kind of general tool that you could probably now actually be productive with. Questions? Yes? Question is, what does do events do in this loop? And all it does is it says each time, if the whole reason I put it here is that, especially when I'm new to programming in this language, it's pretty easy to make myself a loop that I can never get out of. If I put myself into an endless loop, my only hope is to reboot the computer or to kill Excel, and it's gone. Whatever I didn't save is gone. What do events does is it says, every time I hit that statement, it says, OK, interpreter, pause for a moment and just see if anything's trying to happen besides the loop. Like if I pressed a keystroke to try to interrupt the loop. And then if so, it goes, oh, OK, I'm going to interrupt the loop. It just says, hey, don't be so focused on this loop. Let me interrupt you if I need to. But it doesn't change the way it actually processes it all. We could leave it out. It would run exactly the same. We just wouldn't be able to interrupt it manually. OK, this is the first time I've taught this while actually splitting the code so you could see it while it was going. And it seems to have saved us about 10 minutes. I am not opposed to dismissing class early, but I don't want to feel like you're not getting your money's worth here. Any other questions? Yes?
Do you mind just scrolling down to the bottom? The last time, the back.
You now have enough information to start project 1. You actually have enough information to complete project 1. This is kind of everything you need for project 1 is now been covered. So you might go ahead and start that. Questions? OK, class dismissed. I will.
I don't know what your policy is for being like